Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our sixth lesson in Module 4 about exercising the power of faith. I promise you this will be a very, very interesting presentation tonight with a lot of very powerful food for thought. We're going to start off with talking about a very interesting view of the universe. With the things I've studied and delved into a lot of interesting things, one of them is the whole idea of quantum physics and the whole nature of the universe in which we live. And what we kind of gather from the study of quantum physics is that it used to be that we thought that the whole universe was made of tiny particles of solid stuff, and thought that the smallest unit of stuff was an atom, and that elements, which were the things that couldn't chemically be broken down any further, of which everything seemed to be made, were composed of these things called atoms. Then we discovered that atoms had subatomic particles, that in other words, there were particles smaller than the atom, electrons, protons, neutrons, and then discovered a whole bunch of other ones, quarks, leptons. I don't know. There's a lot of theory about different particles. Then, delving deeper, basically it appears that what we think of as particles are actually little waves, little tiny ripples in the continuum of space and time. In other words, they aren't really anything solid at all. They're just like a little blip of energy, like a little blip on a computer screen. In fact, they appear to be like pixelated. They blink in and out of existence very, very rapidly, so that everything appears to be very solid. But really, it's not that way at all. Everything in the universe is composed of energy. So if you look at this from a spiritual perspective, you read in Genesis that God spoke, and now there's the idea of language or speech is just what I am doing right now. I'm making the air vibrate, creating vibration, and that God spoke or put forth the vibration into the universe. Let there be light, and everything was created from that light. Which also in the New Testament is the idea that in the beginning was the Word. Actually, that word that was translated as word is actually the Greek word logos, which is actually the idea behind the words, not the actual words themselves, but the intent of the words, and that was the source of all creation. In Hinduism, the same idea exists there, that that God is sound, not a Brahma, the sound of God, which creates everything. And there are other traditions around the world that all speak of the same idea, that God either speaks or he sings the universe into existence. And the idea that speech is a vibration, words are a vibration, sound is vibration, light is vibration. And therefore, when we name something, we're also having a vibration. So the universe is composed of vibrations. And we have sensory apparatus that pick up certain of these vibrations. Now, there's this notion that I believe, and many other people believe, that when it says in Genesis that we're made in the image of our Creator, that what that means is that He made us to be creators. And you may not think of yourself as a creator, but really, I've figured out we're all creating every single day. And if nothing else, we're creating the experience that we have of our own life. So I want you to take just a moment, wherever you are, and look around you in the room, because I assume you're in a room because you're listening to this on a computer, and realize that everything you can see in that room, maybe with the exception if you have a plant there, was actually created in someone's mind before it was brought into existence, whether it's the computer or tablet that you're watching this webinar on, whether it's the electric lights, whether it's the desk or the different books or objects like the telephone or whatever in the room. Everything that you see started out as an idea. It was first conceived as a thought, and then it was eventually imagined into existence. So the word imagination has this idea of imaging in something, that we come out with this idea that forms in the mind, and then from that, things are brought forth into creation. And we've been talking about the tree of life, and there's this notion in the tree of life, which I won't go into great detail here, but I'm going to explain. It's called the lightning flash of creation, and that is that from the void. If you look at the tree of life in this manner, the top sphere of the tree of life, which has the number 1, is Kether, which means to crown, encircle, or encompass. And the idea here that Royland explained to me is that if I draw a great big circle, then everything within the circle is encircled, it's encompassed, it is crowned, it is defined, and everything outside of that circle, which is what is represented by the top sphere of the tree, is Ein Sof. Ein means not, Sof in Hebrew means end. In other words, not ending, endless. Outside of that circle is endless, infinity, impossible to comprehend. But everything that's inside that circle is defined. So God begins by basically bringing forth creation with the word, and let there be light, and he creates something. He creates a definition of something that previously was undefined. Out of chaos comes order, and then his word creates the next thing, which is a copy of that original order, which is Chokmah, which is wisdom, which is basically a duplication, another circle inside the first circle. And then Binah comes into the picture, which means difference. In other words, now we have a difference. We have 3 different things. We have one thing, the copy of it, and then the idea that there's something that differentiates or makes those 2 things different. So basically, creation goes from the idea expanding forth and then dividing. Everything divides. The light divides from the darkness. The water divides from the earth. The living kingdom of the plants divides from the non-living kingdom. The living kingdom divides into plants and animals, and so on and so forth. Everything begins with expansion and then separation or division, going down in a creative process that goes down the tree until you have the completion of creation, which is the innermost, everything encircled by the innermost sphere, which is the Yesod or foundation, which defines the final area inside, which is the kingdom. So this idea of the lightning flash of creation is this progression of creation, and it goes down through the worlds, beginning with the world of thought down into the world of spirit, and down, and then finally into the physical world. So everything begins in the world of conception, then into the world of energy, and then finally into the world of matter, descending down. So as I was pondering this whole idea of the lightning flash of creation, I had an interesting inspiration, and this was actually an inspiration. I mean, it was like God opened my mind, and I saw this because I'd played a lot with the Western 4 elements, and I realized that the Western 4 elements, air, water, fire, and earth, actually relate to the 4 states that matter occupies on this plane of existence. In other words, earth relates to the idea of solids, water relates to the idea of liquids, air relates to the idea of gases, and then from kind of Einstein's theory of relativity, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, we also realized that there is a 4th state of matter called plasma or energy, light, whatever, that matter also exists as energy. Photons, electrons, which are actually the subatomic particles that are no longer associated with actual atoms. And there's plasma flows in space and whatever of electrons, protons, undifferentiated matter, which is just pure energy. Now, water Okay, now think about this. So water is the only substance we know of that exists in all three states of matter that we recognize readily, solids, liquids, and gases, at normal Earth temperatures. So in its solid form, water is ice. In its liquid form, water is what we think of as water, but water also takes on the form of a gas in the terms of water vapor. Well, that would also suggest that water could take on a fourth form. Water could exist as energy. So what came to me is this, and I want to really ponder this. This is a very, very incredible concept to consider. All right. So here, ice is water that's moving very slowly. Its vibrational rate is very slow. So it comes to our senses as something very dense or very solid. Now, a calorie is the amount of energy it takes to raise the temperature of water 1 degree, a certain amount of water, 1 degree. So as ice absorbs energy, 1 calorie of energy, it goes up in temperature until it hits a temperature we say in the American is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. In international standards, it's 0 degrees Celsius. And then an interesting thing takes place. It suddenly, it's still ice, and the ice is getting a little warmer, a little warmer, a little warmer, and then it hits this magical temperature thing, and suddenly it absorbs not just 1 calorie, but a bunch of calories all at once. Boom. And it begins to move faster, and it melts, and it transforms this from the state of being solid into the state of being liquid. So what has happened is it's been quickened, it's been energized. It is now vibrating at a faster rate. Now, and then it goes to the same thing. Water exists like at 33 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree Celsius. And again, the one calorie per degree goes up and up and up and up until it hits what we call the boiling point of water, which at sea level is 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. And at that point, again, it absorbs not 1 calorie, but a whole bunch of calories. And I don't remember the exact amount, but it absorbs them instantaneously. And there's a transformation, and water ceases to be a liquid and suddenly is transformed to an even faster vibratory state in which the molecules are moving even more quickly, and it becomes a gas. So the Spirit said to me, well, what happens if water can be elevated in vibration to a temperature high enough, or in other words, a speed high enough, that water exists as energy? And that's when I got this idea from the Tree of Life. In fact, I'll go back here a little bit, that if we're going backwards, okay, if we start down here, well, actually, I think I've got a slide here that will show that a little bit later. So basically, if you look at this idea of the universe, basically, everything is composed of energy, and what we have is we're living in a sea of vibrations, and our senses are designed to pick up certain vibrations, certain limited vibrations, and detect them. But there are many vibrations that our senses by themselves cannot detect. So, for example, there's just a little teeny piece of the electromagnetic spectrum that consists of visible light. Below that is what's called infrared light, which we sense as heat, but we don't see. Above that is ultraviolet light, which we don't sense. But doesn't mean infrared light doesn't exist, and ultraviolet light doesn't exist, because there are instruments we can create that detect infrared and ultraviolet light. We can't see X-rays. We can't see microwaves. We can't see radio waves. We can't see gamma waves. Some of them are faster. Some of them are slower. We don't have the senses to pick them up, but they're there. We can develop instruments that pick them up and decode those signals, but they're all around us. I mean, right now around us are hundreds of cell phone conversations, hundreds of radio stations, hundreds of TV stations, hundreds of radio, two-way radio transmissions, all these different vibrations, all of which carry what? Information. Okay, like there are pictures, there are sound waves, there's all kinds of information, and we're surrounded in it. It's a sea of energy, a sea of vibrations that travel certain spaces. So the nature of the universe is that what we think of as an atom being solid is actually 99.999 plus % empty space. There's almost literally nothing there. Even if subatomic particles were actual physical particles that had nothing, and they weren't little vibrations. If you made a hydrogen atom the size of the Earth, the proton would the proton at the center of the nucleus would only be about 600 feet in diameter. That's really small for the size of the entire Earth. Here's this tiny little thing called a proton, and then way out at the circumference of the Earth is spinning electrons. Okay, so if the atom was actually 6 feet in diameter, which is about the height that I am, the proton would be thinner than a strand of hair, which is why physician Richard Gerber says in his book Vibrational Medicine that matter is really frozen light. It's really little teeny particles of light that are mostly surrounded by space. So the reason everything appears solid is the same reason that an airplane propeller, when it's spinning, looks solid, is because it's moving so fast that it creates the illusion of solidity. So even solid matter, even though it's that much space, is moving quickly enough that it appears solid to our senses. But in reality, it's 99.999 nothing. Nothing is there. The only reason why it looks like something is there and it feels like something is there is because we have certain sensory mechanisms that detect those particular frequencies and interpret them and give us the sensation that this is solid or that is liquid or that we can see or hear something. So in terms of sound, we hear over several octaves of sound vibrations. An octave is, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. It's a certain ratio of frequencies that we call an octave. All right. And we have one octave of light that we see. But what happens if we could see infrared or ultraviolet? What would the universe be like if we could see that? What would it be like if we could hear light? If instead of sensing light with our eyes as a visual image, what if we sensed light as sound? What if we sensed sound as light? There's no reason that's not possible. It's just that our senses are designed to pick up these vibrations and interpret them in certain ways. So what I'm pointing here, and I'm going to turn off my webcam so you can see this, is here in this water is existing in the state of something being solid, and then it suddenly goes through a transformation. It goes in a pathway where it changes. It moves back up the order of creation to a higher vibration and becomes a liquid. And then it keeps elevating in energy until it suddenly transforms again and goes into another state of gaseous state. And then what happens if we could transform it to where it elevated to the level of energy? Well, the idea in Einstein's theory of relativity is nothing goes faster than the speed of light. But what if, I'm going to just throw this out as an idea because this is something, again, that spiritually came to me. God put these ideas into my head, and as I did, it just blew my mind. What if there are vibrations that travel faster than the speed of light, but we just have no sensory equipment and cannot construct equipment that detect them? And what if, when I hit that level of energy, it is the bridge between the physical world and the spiritual world? In other words, light or energy is the densest substance of the spiritual world, which in the spiritual world would appear as a solid, and then it could go up from there. and there would be a spiritual liquid form and a spiritual gaseous form, and then another even higher energy form out of the spirit world. And then it goes up one step higher, and that's in the world of thought, the world of consciousness. What if there is such a thing as thought liquid, thought gas, thought pure energy? In other words, what if thought and spirit and matter are simply various levels of vibrations in the universe? And that's really one of the things that the tree of what is showing us. So the idea I'm going to explain is that thoughts are the father of creation. The thoughts are the starting place. And this is what Bob Proctor says in You Were Born Rich. Thoughts become things. If you see it in your mind, you will hold it in your hand. In other words, you can take what you can save in your brain and eventually bring it into physical manifestation. Everything has been created twice, once on the mental plane and once in the physical plane. I would add, everything has been created 3 times, once on the mental plane, again on the spiritual plane, and then finally on the material plane. Henry Van Dyke wrote this and said, I hold it true that thoughts are things. They're endowed with bodies, breath, and wings, and that we send them forth to fill the world with good results or ill. That which we call our secret thought speeds forth to earth's remotest spot, leaving its blessings or its woes like tracks before it as it goes. We build our future thought by thought, for good or ill, yet know it not. Yet so the universe was wrought. Again, in the beginning was the logos, the idea, the thought, okay? And then the thought, the idea became flesh. It became embodied. The logos, the word, manifested on the physical plane, okay? Thought is another name for fate. Choose then thy destiny and wait, for love brings love and hate brings hate. So Napoleon Hill says there's a big difference between wishing for a thing and being ready to receive it. No one is ready for a thing until he believes he can acquire it. So belief is the ability to take thought and not just have a hope or wish or dream or a passing fancy, but actually to be able to take a thought and hold on to it so firmly that I'm able to eventually bring it into existence. And I bring it into existence by bringing it into the world of feeling / spirit, the next world down, by holding on to it in intense desire. So I interpret that emotion, the energy we've been talking about in this class, is the mind-body connection. It's the connection that it's the energy that sits in between thought and the physical world. It is the energy of motion, the life force that drives all action. And when you, in order to create a thought, you have to link it to emotions. You have to, that's what makes it into a belief. That's one of the things that I've taught in this class earlier, and I'm just reiterating it, but in different terms, that emotion is energy in motion. Emotion is a denser form, a spiritual level of being. There's a spirit of love, a spirit of hate, a spirit of happiness, a spirit of joy, a spirit of enthusiasm, a spirit of, we use that term spirit. And I'm saying that what I've learned in emotional healing is that isn't just a saying we have. It actually exists, okay? Love exists. Hate exists. They are vibrations that exist in the universe. There are vibrations that we can detect with our heart, with our inner soul, but we may not be able to detect them so much with, instruments we create, but we can all feel them. We can all sense them. We all know that they exist. So as Napoleon Hill says, the starting point of all achievement is desire. Keep this constantly in mind. Weak desire brings weak results, just as a small fire makes a small amount of heat. When your desires are strong enough, you will appear to possess superhuman powers to achieve. In other words, you'll be able to conceive of something and then desire it so strongly, be so passionate about the seeking it, wanting it, that you'll be able to bring it into existence. And I've been using the metaphor of the expansion and contraction and equilibrium, and I talked about the male and female and the child. So the masculine plants the seed, the feminine is the womb in which the seed develops into the child, and then the birth of the thing is that it's brought forth into the physical manifestation. And so the physical world we observe with our senses, because it's manifest or seen by our senses. But there are many people who think, well, if you can't observe it with our senses, or we can't create instruments that detect it, then it doesn't exist. Well, that's the most ridiculous assumption that anybody could possibly make, because it's stupid. The fact that you can't detect something doesn't prove it doesn't exist. So the whole idea of the spiritual, or what some people have called the metaphysical, that's beyond the physical world we can sense, is that it is not manifest by our senses, but it's something that is there, but we cannot perceive. Well, who says that the vibrations that we can perceive and detect with our instruments are the only vibrations that exist in the universe? Okay, I don't believe that. We have a consciousness that suggests that thought and feeling are real. We sense it down inside of ourselves. And the spiritual is observed with the mind by seeing the relationships between objects and actions observed over time and felt through the heart. That's how we know the spiritual. We know that love exists because we see the action of love between people. We can't actually see love. We can't actually detect love with our five physical senses, or make an instrument that measures love. But we all know it exists because we can observe its effects. We all understand that there's such a thing called life. Not because we can see life or detect life, but because we can observe the action of life in living things, which living things behave differently. That is, they have a different association over time to non-living things. Rocks don't evolve in structure like a plant does and then die. Okay, but that's and we create the abstract label of life, but that's actually a spiritual force that we're talking about, an unseen. So what I started to understand is the grand illusion is that the outer world is making us feel the way we feel and think the way we think, which it can influence that. But the truth of the matter, it's our inner world. It's what's going on in our mind and our heart that is transforming or creating the life that we are experiencing. So we actually have two choices. We can either sit there and take what we've been programmed with, but what we've been taught and what people have indoctrinated us with and what they've convinced us is true, and continue to believe that into existence. Or we can say, wait a minute, I believe I can take the real open-ended idea of belief and I can say, wait a minute, there's got to be something better than this. How can we fix this problem? How can we solve this problem? How can we change this? And that inner spiritually motivated, consciously motivated desire to improve, to make the world a better place, to make ourselves a better place, is the inner spark that, if we let it kindle inside of us and let our imagination and our belief and our faith grow, and we fill that with positive desire, we are capable of bringing forth new creations. We're capable of transforming our life. We're capable of transforming the world around us through the process of belief. So there's a concept on the tree of life of the top and the bottom being mirror images of one another. And I'll go over this in the first lesson of in 2019, where all of the opposites add up to 11. So crown and foundation are opposite ideas. there are 1 and 10 spheres. 2 and 9 are opposites. 3 and 3 and 8, 2 and 9, 5 and 6. They're mirror images. So what happens is you have a mirroring of the upper world and the lower world. The upper world, which reflects consciousness coming down into the emotion of our heart, and then that transforms through our ego into the actual physical experience of life. And the pathway that coming down the lightning flash of creation that crosses from number 5 over to number 6 is the sound of the letter K, and it represents this striking, this polishing, this making smooth. Ryan says it represents a mirror. The idea of Alice in Wonderland going through the looking glass. And what I realized is that as long as we're stuck in ego, as long as we're stuck in the material world, we never see anything really clearly, because everything we see has the beam in our own eye. Well, our unbelief and our habits and our biases and everything create a 2x4 inside of us. That literally, the only thing we can see in the universe is a projection of what's inside of us. We're constantly being faced with a mirror, trying to say, "Look at this inside of you. Look at this inside of you. Look at this inside of you." This is why you may think, "Okay, I'm in a bad relationship. I'm going to leave this relationship, go into another relationship," and you find yourself in the same dynamic in the new relationship you had in the old relationship, because everything is a mirror trying to teach you and show you what you need to work on inside of you. And the pathway that crosses that barrier, which is the one that goes from 7 to 4, is the letter L, and I think of that as the pathway through La La Land. To get past that barrier, you have to transform from ego and judgment to love. You have to get past that barrier of being self-absorbed, egotistically absorbed, judgmentally absorbed, into being merciful, kind, compassionate. And at that point, you begin to develop the ability to truly understand the upper world. And like I said, I could go on about that for a long, long time, but just what I'm trying to show, and I'm going to show you a picture of how that works in a minute. But what's also interesting, as I'll talk about the next thing, all of these pathways are attached to letters in the Hebrew alphabet. So one of the interesting ones is the pathway from 2 to 1, the pathway from Chokmah, which is I associate with the right creative brain, to the oneness of Kether, the third eye, is the Hebrew letter A. Now it's interesting that all the names of deity worldwide, Brahma, Jehovah, Yeshua, that's actually the Hebrew pronunciation of the name of Jesus, all have that ah sound in them. But in Hebrew, that's actually a consonant. It's not a vowel. And the consonant that represents is called the glottal stop. Like the Hebrew word da'at, the in between the ah and the t, ah, t, is a pause, or in other words, a silence. And that's a very interesting metaphorical idea, that the pathway back to oneness is silence, that we have to be able to have silence. We have to be still and know that I am God, a passage from the scripture. So if you start to understand the world in this way, you start to understand that you're immersed in a sea of vibrations. You're not seeing everything that is actually existing. You're seeing what your senses are allowing you to see. And so there have been a lot of, philosophers and whatever who've said that what we're seeing is a shadow of what is really real. And it's like watching a movie and you get caught up in the drama of it and everything else like that. So what if you're in this life and it's like a movie and you're thinking it's all really, really very, very real, but it's really only a teeny little fraction of reality that you're seeing, a teeny little piece of reality that you're perceiving. And you're so caught up in it that you can't open your mind to see the bigger picture. And what if, more importantly, you're not just participating in this movie, you're actually writing it from inside of you, but you're creating the movie partly from everything that everybody else has programmed you to believe and taught you to believe, so that you can't perceive beyond that. One of the reasons why we can't get silent is because we're constantly distracted. Everything in life wants to keep us distracted. In fact, the moment you start trying to pursue a truly spiritual path, you will find you will be hit with problem after problem that will try to distract you and basically take you away from this. I hope that I uploaded the right handouts. I will share the file, but I'm not sure that I might not have accidentally uploaded last week's file for a person who was asking about the handouts. So what we have to learn to do is be still and go inside of us and really understand what is going on inside of us. Because I have to start taking responsibility for what I'm thinking and feeling. So if you're watching a movie and you don't like the movie, you're watching a TV show, you don't like the TV show, you change the channel. Well, if you don't like what's going on in your life, you change your thoughts. You shift the thoughts you're thinking. And since you can only think of one thing at a time, if you change your thought, you will change everything going on inside of you. So you can focus your mind on things to change it. Most of us, our minds are bouncing to and fro. And to learn to focus the brain and be quiet and contemplate deeply on one thing is to create that sacred silence, that peace inside that allows you to start the process that really is part of faith. Now, this was an interesting thing I read, and I'm going through this really fast, but I have to because it's a lot to cover. I read this book called Let There Be Light about understanding the Aramaic culture in which the Bible was written. And in that Aramaic culture, if you understand the nature of what's called an idiom, an idiomatic expression, that's an expression that when you translate it literally, it doesn't mean what the literal words don't necessarily mean what it translates to. So, for example, one of the things he talks about is that Jesus said, if you drink any deadly thing, it won't hurt you. Well, in the Aramaic culture, drinking deadly things is dealing with malicious gossip and bad things people say about you. And that totally transforms the meaning of that if you translate it from the idiom. So what he said in this book is that in Near Eastern cultures, people talk about what they see in a vision, in meditation, or in a dream, and they say it in the idiom, the angel of the Lord appeared, or I was in the Spirit, or the Spirit of the Lord came on me, or the word of the Lord came unto me. And every time those phrases are used, those are idiomatic expressions that refer to inner visions, to things that happened in the stillness of meditation or in a dream, which is why we call that having vision, or Native Americans called it dream time. And learning to take a hold of something in your mind is giving substance to what is hoped for and evidence to what is not yet in physical existence. Do you understand? By laying hold of it in my mind with this firmness of purpose, okay, and then asking, okay, but asking in faith, nothing wavering, because if you waver, your mind goes, will it happen? Won't it happen? Will it happen? Won't it happen? Or maybe this will happen, or blah, blah, blah. There's no firmness of mind. There's no control of the thoughts. What if faith is basically the act of holding on to the desired outcome so firmly and planting it in your mind and your heart with such intense desire and holding on to that fervently, never wavering until it comes into physical existence? If you think about it, that's how Edison developed the light bulb. That's how people have invented all kinds of things. Does that also mean that if it works on a scientific principle, doesn't it also work on a spiritual principle? If I want to be healed, if I want to find truth or knowledge, that if I have faith, I preserve it. So this is a thing from a book, The Temple of God by Annalise Guerin. She says, it is only when one's turbulent, discordant thoughts are stilled and in the quiet repose, in other words, you've quieted your mind, that he can comprehend the powers of this sacred font. She's talking about the pool of your mind, like a pool of water. When the pool of water is still, you can see a reflection in it. But when the wind is blowing and the water is turbulent, it can't have a reflection. You can't see into the water, and the water can't make a reflection. And she says, likens this to your mind. You have to quiet your mind so that you make your mind still or quieted. And in that stillness or quietness of your mind, you place the image in your mind of that which is desired so that you can image it in or imagine it into being. So I want to, oh gosh, I'm going to go over tonight. I can just tell. Okay, so sorry. I mean, it's just the nature of the discussion requires, such laying out, because it's such deep stuff. I have to lay out the ideas, and you just have to sit and digest them, because I want to start here with this. This came to me on the Tree of Life, of the process of the creation of a child, a human being, from before they were conceived to the time that they become able to become a parent themselves. And so it starts with sexual desire. A couple, desires each other, and they come together. That's the mysterious thing, that the idea of the child before the child even begins to become reality. And then the child is conceived. The masculine and feminine cells unite, create a whole new cell, and that spark of conception is the beginning of the creation of the new person. And what happens first, and this is the idea of expansion, that cell divides and divides and divides and divides and divides and replicates itself many times, exactly the same, makes many, 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 many copies of it. You follow? That's the idea of Chokmah, wisdom. It makes many, many copies of itself till it makes this big ball of cells. And then once it becomes a big ball of cells that all are exactly alike, it folds in on itself to create a tube through the middle of the cells and differentiates into 3 layers. Isn't that interesting? 3 layers. So it forms and then it divides. And as those layers develop, that internal layer, the tube that goes through the middle, the outside becomes the skin. You develop the digestive tract, the lungs, all of the mucous membranes from that outer layer of cells that folded inward. So the skin and the mucous membranes form from the same tissue. And then another part of it develops bones and muscles, another part of it develops internal organs. And gradually all the different cells start differentiating into differentiated cells to create all the organs. And then, so all of a sudden you have a fetus. And all the organs and parts now are developed. And as that fetus is now developed, then the fetus grows. Now the cells that are differentiated start replicating, but this time they're replicating within their differentiation to basically grow the completed child into a big enough form to survive. Okay, understand? They're not differentiating anymore. They're just expanding in their differentiation. And then, of course, you have birth. The mother and child, which have been connected, are now separated, and you cross that midline, as above, so below, the inner versus the outer. The child is born into the world, separates from the mother, and now you have the mother-infant bond, 7 relationship, where you have that early childhood, caring, the mother nurses the child, and then the child begins to grow again. This time, growing again in stature apart from the mother. And then at a certain point, there's another differentiation because the kid gets big enough to start separating from the parents. Not separating from the parents, like the child was born separate, but separating from the parents as becoming now their own person, and wanting to develop their own life and have become a self-sufficient adult. And then from that, they are able now to go desire a partner and start the cycle all over again. Well, if you kind of can understand and see that on the tree, then I want you to look at this, because all of this came to me simultaneously, by the way. This came to me as just like a flood of information that I wrote down in the space of like 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. And I had to really ponder what had been given me. All creation starts with a need. There's some kind of purpose. There's some kind of motivation. I'm sick. I don't have enough money. There's this problem I want to solve or whatever. That's the mysterious part of Kether. And then as I ponder the problem and I pray and seek for a solution, I ask, seek, and knock, okay, to find a solution, an inspiration comes to me. An idea comes to me. A logos comes to me, which is a mental idea of a solution that could be had to this problem. And if I grab hold of that idea, that pure intelligence that was downloaded to me, and I start thinking about it, visualizing it, imaging it in, I start to create, I start to grow the idea in my mind. Okay, I expand on that idea. And as I start to see, wow, that's a really good idea, blah, 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 blah. And it gains strength in my mind through holding on to it. Then I start to go, okay, if I was going to do that, then I start analyzing the steps. Understand? I start planning. I start thinking, well, how would I bring that into thing? That's the contraction from 2 to 3. I start differentiating the different parts of my idea and how I would, deal with all those parts. Where am I going to get the money? How am I going to get the funding? How am I going to, whatever I need to do to make that happen. And then at that point, I now have this idea. I can bring it to my voice. I can speak it into existence. I begin to bring it forth as desire, which is I can communicate. I can talk to about it. I have knowledge of it. And then I can, because I can speak it, I can begin to actually gather the actual resources, the meet the people, find the ways to make things happen. And then I can birth the idea. I can bring it and start bringing it into actual existence. And then I can nurture it. I can continue to grow it until it becomes a stable, self-sustaining creation and is finally completed and becomes the platform to launch new ideas. In other words, I'm comparing the idea of how the child develops to how an idea is developed. And the idea of it basically descending from thought into the material realm through a sequence of steps of expansion, contraction, and coming to balance or equilibrium, expansion, contraction, in each of the 3 worlds: the mind, the heart, which is also, remember, the social world, and then finally into physical, practical existence. So with that, I'm going to quickly go through the last 2 centers. The third eye center, which is over the forehead and associated with the pineal gland, is the bridge between the self and the higher world. And it's where that idea of inspiration comes from, that pure knowing, that idea of let your eye. Now notice that scripture says, not let your eyes be single to the glory of God, but let your eye be single to the glory of God. That eye is referring to the eye of consciousness. It's let your consciousness, let your mind, the intent or focus of your mind be single to the glory of God. And that idea of the mark of the beast in the forehead is actually, I think, related to the idea that where your mind is focused, if you're focused on mammon, on material wealth and material gain and whatever, you're not single to the glory of God. You can't serve God and mammon. You have to have your eye, your consciousness rooted in one or the other. Okay. And there's that idea in the book of Revelation of the righteous having the Father's name in their forehead. And that's also in that sphere of the tree of life. There's a whole interesting dialogue about that of that relates to that concept of having your eye single. So positive third eye energy is to have a clear perception of life, a clear ability to distinguish light and darkness, an ability to receive inspiration and guidance in solving problems, and being able to recognize and utilize one's spiritual gifts. The sources of third eye wounds are self-delusions, meaning not wanting to see the truth and clinging to opinions and beliefs that don't work, that are not yielding positive results, or fear of acknowledging and utilizing the spiritual gifts and wisdom one has. Those are the two reasons why I find the center blocked. One is the person doesn't want to see what they actually know. They're deliberately blocking off their consciousness from acknowledging what they really know, or they have felt the presence of spiritual gifts and that scared them and they've closed this down. These are the third eye affirmations, which we test people on to check that. These are some of the essential oils. Again, this is all review from module 3. And these are some of the flower essences for that. This next center is really one of the more interesting ones. And I just check something really quickly here. And it is the crown energy, which is right on top of the head. And, there's this idea that there's this soft spot at the top of the head, and some traditions believe that that's where the spirit or soul enters the body when we come. But it's basically the idea of connection to what's beyond me. It's whatever that life force or that energy, the breath of God, the spirit of God, the life of God. It's that connection to that source of life that's beyond my physical body. And it deals with being alive, being present, being embodied, being able to be in the present moment in my life. The things that cause people to be have this energy center shut down, and when someone has the energy center shut down, I say they're beside themselves, they're out of themselves, they're not really here fully. Okay, their spirit or consciousness is not fully present in their life. And birthing trauma can cause that. Very difficult, traumatic, painful births, so that they're not fully incarnated in this life. It can happen because of severe trauma, especially trauma does cause disassociation. I've had many people who describe, go back and remember instances of being abused, and they describe out-of-body experiences that they like watching themselves being abused, from a distance. Stuff like that, ritualistic abuse, also psychoactive drugs. Drugs can do this to you. They could basically make you kind of like out of yourself. So the birthing trauma issues, some of this shows up in energy center number 10 and 11, but it also can show up in energy center 0, and that can cause some of this thing. So, like, what happens is if a person, for some reason, doesn't really ever really enter this life fully, they're going to be very awkward and they're going to feel very uncomfortable in their body. And one of the things I've observed, and I need to turn on the webcam so you can see this. I'm actually going to stop the slide presentation for a second, is their eyes tend to be like this. In other words, their eyes tend to drift upward, and they're spacey. They're literally spacey. I had a situation where, to tell a very specific example of this, where some people asked me to deal with a kid that they had who had been kicked out of every school, public and private, that they tried to put him in. He was just totally out of control. I went in and observed this kid, and he was bouncing all over the room. And when I tried to talk to him, I would say, "Look at me," and he would look at me, and then his eyes would drift upward, like they were like going off. And in talking to the parents, I found out that they had gotten married over the objection of both of their in-laws. Once they were married, both sets of in-laws actively tried to convince them they should get divorced and shouldn't stay married. and they were about to get divorced when they discovered she was pregnant and decided to stay together for the sake of the child. However, they both admitted that they resented this child for preventing them from getting divorced. So it's understandable that this kid knew that he was not wanted, and he never fully embraced life. And so I worked on this crown energy, and the next time I saw him, he could look me in the eye, and his parents said he had improved amazingly. Although they still needed, I had to do some work with them because they still hadn't fully been able to accept him. So this daydreaming and the inability to be present is a big part of this. Ritualistic abuse is designed to disassociate people. It's designed, this is abuse that's done as part of satanic rituals, and it is aimed at deliberately traumatizing the person and fracturing their personality to the point that they will want to leave their body. They'll want to disassociate from their body and open themselves up for demonic possession and control. Now, if any of you don't believe this stuff, okay, fine. I accept you don't believe it. I've personally experienced this. I've worked with this. This is very, very real, and probably one of the toughest things you'll ever work on in emotional healing work is dealing with someone who's been the victim of this kind of abuse and is basically disassociated and possibly has some other entities that come in and try to control their body. I knew a psychologist who felt the same way, that multiple personality disorder and severe psychosis and schizophrenia were actually what the Bible talks about, demon possession. I know that the Aramaic idiom, casting out devils, meant curing people who were insane. So if Jesus cured people who were insane by casting out devils, I think that may be actually what literally happens there, is that when a person doesn't want to inhabit their own body, or they're basically persecuted and kind of driven so that they don't want to be present, it opens up for other spirits to come in and take control. Like Jesus says, you can cast the demon out, and then if he comes back and finds the house empty, you're not occupying it, he goes and gets more demons and comes back. Okay, so these are actually things that I've seen associated with crown energy issues. And these are affirmations for the Crown Energy Center. And again, crown essential oils that we talked about before, and flower essences that can work on the Crown Energy Center. Now, I actually managed to get through that. I'm really proud of myself. I didn't, I'm sorry I didn't get the handouts. I think I got the handouts posted on the page on modernherbalmedicine.com last week. I'm pretty sure I did. But I know this is pretty heavy duty stuff, but I have real experience with it. It's very real. And the whole idea of something I talked about in module 3 of mental tools, I believe operates on the principle that I've been explaining on the Tree of Life, that when you're working with someone, there is a spiritual reality behind what is taking place on the physical plane. So if you know how to quiet yourself and go into that quiet meditative state and pray and ask to be given guidance to how to help this person, a lot of times visual images will come to your mind, or they will start going on a symbolic journey. And in that symbolic journey, when you go into you in your mind, forming mental tools and applying that, there is something actually happening on the mental and spiritual planes that is real, very, very real. And then it causes a shift on the physical plane. And I've dealt with this enough to know that this is very, very real. One of the most powerful things that ever happened to me was I was trying to help a woman who I personally, who I couldn't get to connect with what was going on. And I suspected that she had been abused as a child. She was numb from the waist down. She couldn't feel anything. She couldn't connect with anything. So I had my hand on her abdomen, and I was, kind of praying, seeking guidance on how to help her. And I had this sensation like that my consciousness left my brain and traveled down my arm and went boom and connected with hers. And I found myself in this room with this little kid, this little girl, who I understood was her as a little girl. And she was crying, and obviously she'd been very badly hurt. And when she saw me, she became terrified and started like I was going to hurt her. And I crouched down and tried to make myself as small as possible, and said, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you. And I talked with her and I coaxed her, and eventually she came over to me, and I talked to her and I said, look, the whoever did this to you, they were very sick. It wasn't your fault. You need to forgive them. You need to move on. You're going to be okay. And I talked with this little girl for what I would say was probably 10 or 15 minutes. And finally I realized she was comforted and I needed to go. And I said, I'm going to give you something to help you. And in my mind, I conjured up this gigantic teddy bear that was almost as big as she was. And I said, here, I'm going to leave this with you, which she hugged the teddy bear. And I said, you're going to be okay from now on. You're going to be much, much better. And then all of a sudden, and I'm back in my own body. And I opened my eyes and I looked down, and here was this woman, and her entire countenance had changed. Before, she had looked very hard and very tough and very like she had really closed down emotionally. And all her face was just soft and it was glowing, and the tears had just made her mascara stream all over her face, but she still looked radiant. And she opened her eyes just a second after I opened my eyes, and she looked up at me and she said, thank you. And I go, and I remember thinking, what just happened? What happened here? And she kept thanking me and telling me she just totally felt better, and she felt more peace than she'd ever had in her life, and blah, blah, blah. How did that happen? Where did that happen? You understand? It happened on a different plane of existence. And that's what visions are. And that's what faith and spirituality is all about. It's not about this material plane of existence. It's about a higher plane of existence that we have the capability of accessing through the inner world. And that's how we know God. And that's how we know the creativity that our Father gave us from the very beginning when he made us in our image. So I really want to encourage you with this particular lesson to ponder it, think about it, meditate about it, pray about it, ask for guidance to understand. Ask if I'm telling the truth or not telling the truth. You don't have to believe me. Ask, pray about it. And as it unfolds to your mind, it will open up you to a whole new consciousness that faith is not just accepting a bunch of doctrines and dogma. Faith is an ability to transform the world in which we live and make it a better place through the power of our Father and Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. And that transformation of the earth is what we're here to do as believers. Is we're here to literally reach up and say, help bring the kingdom of God down to this plane of existence through our faith and our belief and our manifestation. That's what we're here to do. That's an interesting idea. Now, I want to just, before I go, I am going to, for next year, there's 2 more lessons in this particular course that I put together for this year. I was originally going to finish it this year, but I bumped a couple of lessons back. And so the last 2 lessons, which are going to go into a little bit more about understanding the whole nature of the tree of life. And I'm going to go through some things like, I'm going to go through the 10 commandments of the tree of life. I'm going to go through a bunch of spiritual and temporal concepts on the tree to try to show you how accurate this model is in the last 2 lessons. But I'm also going to do an entire new webinar series next year, which will bridge off of this one. You don't have to have attended the emotional healing to go through this, but it's going to be called Seeking Light and Truth. And Wednesday is the preview for this. So if you'd like to, I put up the thing so you can click on that and register. I'll also put that with the recording and I'll send it out. I'll also have the recording of the email posted up on YouTube. But this will be a series of webinars in 2019 I'm going to be doing, and I'm going to introduce what I'm going to be talking about and so forth this Wednesday. So if any of you are interested, please sign up for that particular webinar series. Okay. I did not put Module 4 in the Online Learning Center. I created a page on modernherbalmedicine.com that actually has all the handouts and all the links to the webinar recordings that are there. And I'll go ahead and try to send out again an email to everybody registered for this so that that will help. Someone said about a question about having sexual encounters with spirits. Okay, I think that people can have, if you can have a dream about sex, you are contemplating sexuality in a different dimension. But I don't think that is a physical thing that you're talking about. It's again, there's a whole world of consciousness on which things take place in consciousness, okay, that aren't taking place on this physical realm. And I know, still digesting last week's class, digesting this week's class. Remember, it took me months to digest this. So please don't think that because you can't totally understand this right now. Pray about it, meditate on it, review it, and it will unfold to your understanding. I promise it will unfold to your understanding. It is deep stuff. It took me months before the ahas started taking place, and I started to, I get it. It was amazing experience for me. So please be patient with yourself. And if anything doesn't feel right to you, reject it. It's not going to offend me if you think that something I'm teaching is wrong. I'm only putting it out here because I've seen really powerful stuff take place that bettered people's lives, bettered my own life, brought me closer to God, helped other people find a relationship with God in the things that I'm teaching. And so if it doesn't benefit you, don't worry about it. Only take that part that actually does benefit you. So again, appreciate you being part of this series. The last 2 lessons again will be in January. Have a happy Christmas holiday. Have a great new year, and I'll catch you for the final episodes of this in January. Okay, good night, everybody.